Donald Trump's attorney at the mics right now.
It's about representing President Trump. It is the proudest thing I could ever do. What I am having second thoughts about is the license that I stand here with that the people in there are supposed to have. I have not spoken because I respect my ethics while I'm on trial. But let me now speak about what has happened. I have sat on trial after trial for months in this state, the state of New York. Attorney General Letitia James, and now this. Weeks. Why? Because President Trump is leading in the polls, and now we see what you get in New York. So don't get it twisted, whoever asked me that question. I am so proud to stand with President Trump. But I am not proud to stand with what I saw in that courtroom.
Ms. Habba, is the
I'm not finished. Let me just finish and I'll take questions, please. Before I walked into court, that judge decided that every single defense President Trump had, we were not allowed to raise in front of the jury. It is in writing, and I encourage the journalists, the real journalists, to take the minute to look at his orders. There was no proof. And I couldn't prove that she didn't bring in the dress. There was no DNA. There was no expert. My experts were denied. Two of them were denied to come in. They didn't let me bring up that Reid Hoffman funded Miss Kaplan. And you know what we got in there? That my witness, who was her friend, who said that she is a drug addict and the drug addict is herself. That friend, I found out in there, was paid for by Miss Kaplan's firm, and that is disgusting. That is a violation of everything I stand for, and that is why I stand with Trump. And that is why so many Americans are so proud that he is running again and so excited to run to the ballot box. But don't get it twisted. We are seeing a violation of our justice system. Ladies and gentlemen, you are not allowed to be stripped of every defense that you have. You are not allowed to be told that you can't bring it up. And imagine a point where a judge tells the lawyer, before your client, the former president of the United States, the leading candidate and obvious nominee for the Republican Party, before he takes the stand to defend himself, Ms. Habba, tell me the questions you're going to ask in open court and tell me exactly what he's going to respond. And then edited my questions, edited the response he was allowed to give. And guess what my client did? He took the stand. He abided by the rules of this corrupt system that I have seen. We will immediately appeal. We will set aside that ridiculous jury. And I just want to remind you all of one thing. I will continue with President Trump to fight for everybody's First Amendment right to speak. Everybody's a right to defend themselves when they are wrongfully accused, and to be able to say, I didn't do it. And to double and triple and quadruple down and say, this is wrong. This is wrong. But we are in the state of New York. We are in a New York jury, and that is why we are seeing these witch hunts, these hoaxes, as he calls them. And this is another one of them. Be brought in New York, in states where they know they will get juries like this. It will not deter us. We're fighting, and I assure you, we didn't win today, but we will. That was made in there, and the behavior I saw in there, some of which was reported widely today, gave us the most perfect record on appeal. And even if I needed it, which I don't, we were stripped of every defense, every single defense before we walked in there. And I am proud to stand with President Trump because he showed up, he stood up, he took the stand, and he faced this judge. And you know what? I'll continue to do so with him. Yes.
Ms. Habba, is the former...
All right, there is Donald Trump's lawyer, Alina Habba, heatedly making her statement to the press and public after her client, former President Donald Trump, was hit with that $83.3 million verdict in compensatory damages, in reputational repair money, and in punitive damages by this jury in the second defamation case brought against Trump by author E. Jean Carroll. Let me go to Aaron Katersky outside the courthouse there. Aaron, just to clear it up a little bit, she's saying that she was treated unfairly. Her client was treated unfairly in this case because he wasn't allowed to make certain defenses. What was the judge's reasoning?
The judge was concerned, he said, about putting inadmissible evidence before the jury because a prior jury in this very courthouse back in May, Terry, found that former President Trump was liable for sexually assaulting and defaming E. Jean Carroll. And the judge said it is a widely accepted legal principle that this cannot be a do-over by a disappointed litigant. And so he put very strict guardrails on what was able to be argued here. And he instructed the jury, both at the outset and again before they deliberated, that they had to accept as true that Donald Trump sexually assaulted E. Jean Carroll in the Bergdorf Goodman dressing room, as she alleged, back in the 1990s, and that his statements denying it were defamatory. They weren't allowed to consider anything else, and so Trump was not allowed to testify otherwise, and his attorneys were not allowed to argue otherwise. And so, in some ways, Alina Habba is right. She was hamstrung in the defenses that she could make, but by design, because the only issue here was what damages Donald Trump should pay.
Crystal clear, as always. Aaron Katersky, thank you very much for that. And I want to take it to our ABC News analyst, legal analyst and trial attorney and author Brian Buckmeyer. So, Brian, back to you. On what Alina Habba just said and what Aaron explained, was the judge right to do that? I guess he didn't want to have a rerun of a trial that a jury had already considered the evidence and found that, in fact, Donald Trump had defamed E. Jean Carroll when he denied sexually assaulting her. So the judge didn't want to do that again. So do you think the judge, that's going to be upheld on appeal, that the appeals court will say, yes, that's the proper way to handle a case like this?
So, Terry, I say this as Alina Habba and I have something in common. We are both officers of the court, barred in the state of New York. I'm also barred in the Southern and Eastern District of New York and the Supreme Court of the United States of this country. What she is saying is wrong and absolutely misleading to the public. So let me just fact check real quick. These are two separate issues, and I'll slightly disagree with Aaron as well. She was not hamstrung. In one case, where we're talking about liability, whether or not he committed sexual abuse of E. Jean Carroll, that was resolved. The question of damages does not talk about whether or not this sexual abuse occurred. It's not relevant. That issue has already been decided. Donald Trump decided not to show up to that trial, decided not to make any arguments. Any arguments as to the defense, as to whether or not sexual abuse occurred, whether or not E. Jean Carroll is credible as to what she said happened in that store, in that changing room, that is not an issue, in fact, in the defamation case for damages. It is separate and apart. What she is doing there is campaigning. It is not being an attorney. It is two different things. I do not know what she was doing. We clearly are not practicing in the same bar or in the same reality, because what she is saying is incorrect. What she did do, and she did do some great things, she argued a defense of these are not actual damages, because that's what she was allowed to argue. She was allowed to argue that E. Jean Carroll became a household name before Donald Trump came into the limelight, that many people didn't know who E. Jean Carroll was until she fought back against Donald Trump, and that she did not, in fact, have damages. Alina Habba, great argument. That's your defense there. But to say that this didn't happen, to say that she's not credible, to say that people were paid for to testify, you should have shown up to the first trial. And to argue the way that you're doing to mislead people is horrible. And you should not count yourself as someone who has the thoughtfulness and the truthfulness to argue what happened in this case. Argue what you had to argue what you could argue. And to answer your question more directly, Terry, yes, upon appeal, some of the strongest arguments are to say that a judge incorrectly applied the law, that they restricted evidence from coming in, and it often does lead you to a victory. But I don't see an error here. The judge was correct to say, this is what you're arguing. This is what you can argue. Now, was it a little paternalistic to go so far as to ask an attorney, what questions are you going to ask? What answers are your client going to give? I agree with Habba on that. She's right. You shouldn't have to ask that question. If she asks a question of her client and he says something inappropriate, let it be objected, let it be struck from the record, as he did on many of the questions here. But I don't think he went so far that an appeal would say, you know what, there's more than what we call a harmless error, and it should be reversed. Some missteps were made by the judge, I agree, in some point, but not to the point that Habba is articulating just there.
Got it. That's very helpful. The notion that that the judge, which did sound a little paternalistic, tell me exactly what your questions are going to be to the witness, and I'll tell you which ones you can ask and which ones you can't ask. That's a heavy-handed judge, but you don't think that's reversible error?
There's this thing, the concept is called harmless error, where you can say a judge did make a mistake, but did it go to the overall impact of the case? So let's say the judge doesn't do that. Do you still think we're not going to get an $83.3 million settlement for E. Jean Carroll? And most people would say, nah, I think it's still going to be pretty high. And so we would call it harmless error, and I don't think it would overturn it. I do think the judge overstepped there, but overall, I don't see the appellate issues. But I will wait for the 30 days for Alina Habba to write the motion, and then we can judge it from there.
Got it. Thank you, Brian.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.